Hey, hi there. Would you be interested to know what are the issues that you must confront when you're hiring a teenager for a summer job, say? Or what if you're that teenager? What advantages might you be able to accrue to yourself if you do get a summer job in ways that you're not even thinking about? You're going to be learning about this on today's State of Greater Western New York report, which is brought to you by...
Imagine yourself communicating with a difference. Pan-Dimensional Solutions helps you do this. Whether live spectator events, taped broadcasts, or real-time audience-engaging programs, you can benefit immediately from the tools Pan-Dimensional Solutions will share with you. Do you want to make a difference? Contact us at pandimensional.com. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome again to this week's version of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, your host, and today we've got two very special guests that will tell us about the ins and outs of employment, particularly for those looking for summer jobs this coming year. As soon as school ends, or maybe even before, a lot of teenagers will go out there and be looking for jobs. What are the sort of issues that they have to think about for themselves? What are some of the issues that the people who hire them have to think about? Joining us first is our Scott DeLuca. He's a child labor attorney in Buffalo, New York. Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, Chris. I am Scott DeLuca. I'm a labor and employment attorney working at Kevin Cook LLP in downtown Buffalo. I've been practicing labor and employment law for 23 years in Western New York after graduating from New York Law School in 1998. I'm admitted to practice in the courts of the state of New York and all of the federal courts, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court. And my practice is focused on labor and employment law, including the issues we're going to discuss today.
Great. Thanks a lot, Scott, and great for having you here. First question is, if you're below the age of 18, what does that mean generally when you're trying to get a job out there in the real world?
Well, there are a series of jobs that that individuals under the age of 18 cannot do. So let's talk about those first. And regardless of your actual age in that range, anybody under 18 cannot work on a freight or passenger elevator. They can't be working in manufacturing or packaging or storing of explosives. They can't work in penal or correctional facilities. They can't work in things that deal with paint or dry colors or inks or white leads, dangerous or poison acids, operating steam boilers, anything that's to do with construction work, including demolition, construction, operation of excavation equipment, anything dealing with harmful dust or radioactive substances, logging, mine and quarry work, power-driven woodworking or metal punching tools, circular saws, bandsaws, guillotine saws, slaughter or meat packing, power-driven hoisting apparatus, manufacturing of brick or tile or products, helping out on a motor vehicle, or being involved as a dancer in a place where, well, in essence, it's a strip club. Those are things that children under the age of 18 cannot do under any circumstance.
That's a pretty long list. Are there any exceptions to that?
Well, being a legalist, of course there are exceptions. If you are under the age of 18 and you're involved in a registered apprenticeship program, or you're a student learner and you're enrolled in a course of study through BOCES, if you're a trainee in an on-the-job training program that's registered with the Commissioner of Labor, or you're a student leader, or you've completed a work training program, then you can perform those work, that laundry list of things that we talked about. So there are circumstances when you can perform that work, but it's very limited and it's going to be strictly supervised.
So you should probably be talking to somebody who knows a little bit about this, especially if you're a parent and your child is working in an industry that you kind of wonder, is this really right? I mean, there are the classic industries where, grocery stores, things like that. But every once in a while, there's an opportunity, and sometimes the pay is a little bit more to work in these manufacturing facilities. And there are jobs within those facilities that they can do, clerical jobs, things like that, that are definitely okay. But there are also jobs that are a little bit dangerous and aren't suitable for younger, well, I'll say children, but for non-adults, we'll say anybody below the age of 18. Speaking about age, there's rules that are different based on your age. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, say, the older teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds, what sort of rules do they have? And then maybe we'll get into the younger ones to give us a little differentiation between the two age groups.
Certainly. Well, 16 and 17-year-olds, there are, generally speaking, if you're going to work in a grocery store and whatnot, you're going to be required to have working papers. But there are jobs that you can perform without working papers. They can work on a farm. They can serve as a caddy on a golf course or a caddy in a bridge tournament. They can work as a babysitter. They can perform yard work or household chores in a residence or in a not-for-profit organization. Or you can perform work for your parents or guardians that's outdoor work or in connection, as long as it's not connected with a trade, business, or service. So that type of work is free and open. But 16 and 17-year-olds are prohibited not only from performing the work that I identified, they're also prohibited from performing work when they are supposed to be in school, and that's going to be the rule for all minors. Certainly, 16-year-olds have the option to, unfortunately, drop out of school, and if they do that, the rules do change. But generally speaking, if you are a student who goes to school and you're required to be in school, then you cannot be performing work during that time. The other thing that I would point out is there are certain times that minors in the 16 to 17-year-old range can perform work. During the summer months when school is not in session, they can work anytime between 6 a.m. and midnight. So between midnight and 6 a.m. they cannot perform work. There are some different rules if you're a newspaper carrier, and there are some rules if you're involved in a street trade, which is not really applicable to too many people anymore. But more importantly, 16 and 17-year-olds can work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, up to 48 hours in a week. That is a statutory cap. Working beyond that is a problem. And one important note, if a minor works more than 40 hours in a week, they are entitled to overtime, just like any other employee.
Right. How about the 14 and 15-year-olds? The rules change a little bit for that younger age group.
They do change for 14 and 15-year-olds. That's correct, Chris. They can also work as a caddy on a golf course. They can work as a babysitter. They can also do casual yard work and household chores at a residence or not-for-profit organization, as long as it doesn't involve using power-driven machinery. They can also work for a parent, aunt, uncle, grandparent, or guardian on a family farm or a leased family farm. They can also work as a caddy in a bridge tournament or on a home farm or do outdoor work, again, as long as it's not involved in a trade, business, or service. All of that can be done without working papers. 14 and 15-year-olds can also work as a child performer, a child model, or a newspaper carrier in accordance with the requirements applicable to those professions. Just like 16 and 17-year-olds, there are time limits when 14 and 15-year-olds cannot work. For one, they absolutely are not allowed to work when they are supposed to be in school, and they are strictly forbidden from performing work in factories. They can work in an office in a factory, but they cannot work in the factory floor, whether it's for a parent or otherwise. There's also the laundry list that we talked about earlier of work that no minor can perform, and that equally applies to minors in the 14 to 15-year age range. Finally, like 16 and 17-year-olds, there are time limits. During the period from June 21st to Labor Day, minors that are 14 to 15-year-old can work only between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Those hours are 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. during the school year, but during those summer months, it's 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. that they're prohibited from performing work. Minors that are 14 and 15-year-old can work 8 hours a day. They can work 6 days a week, but they cannot work more than 40 hours in any work week. So they're limited in that regard. They will not be eligible for overtime. Of course, if you're a newspaper carrier, the time changes just a little bit because of the early morning work that may be involved with that.
Right. Now, how about the case of if you're less than 14? And can you still work, or are there special rules that apply there?
There are special rules that apply to children under the age of 14. Generally, it's disfavored that these children are performing work, but they can work as a child performer or a child model. Starting at age 11, you can be a newspaper carrier in the state of New York, as long as they're doing it in accordance with the requirements of other legal requirements, for example, in the education law. They can also work on a home farm or other outdoor work related to family operations. And that includes not only working on the farm, but also selling the goods at a farm market that's run by the family. They can also serve as a bridge caddy, but I'll note, since I'm a golfer, they're not eligible to be caddies under the age of 14 on the golf course. So there is work that can be done by children under the age of 14, but it is quite limited. I've mentioned earlier that there are working paper requirements, and I don't know if we should talk about that for a minute too, Chris.
Actually, you know what? I'm thinking maybe it would be helpful to kind of give an example, and you can discuss working papers to the extent they're relevant to this example. I talk to parents who hire their kids for their side businesses. So these are not factory jobs or anything like that. And they'll hire their kids, pay them a penny to stamp envelopes, or, for each envelope they stamp, something like that. How does that all work on this? If a child, and regardless of age, is working for their parents, doing that sort of stuff, what do the parents have to do to make sure that they're following the rules?
Well, I'll admit that I grew up in a family restaurant business myself, and I can recall very early on helping to set the banquet room tables with the silverware as soon as I was old enough to reach up to the table. Technically, that type of work is unlawful and is not permitted, even though it is a family business. But the key there is that it's a business. Because it's a trade or business or service, that is the reason that work is technically unlawful. That being said, a lot of people are doing it, and regardless of the nature of the work that's being done, minors are entitled to the same protections under the law that adults are. They have the same rights and privileges under the law as the rest of us. So if I own a factory and I manufacture widgets, just because it's my child, I can't let them work on the factory floor, because working in a factory could be prohibited under the age of 16. So just because it's my child doesn't change that. But turning to what they can and can't do, minors are entitled to minimum wage. Minors are entitled to overtime. Minors are subject to the same prohibitions on discrimination and retaliation and harassment. Minors have to be trained on sexual harassment, just like any other employee. The leave requirements required by state labor law are applicable. Paid family leave, they're eligible for it. They're eligible for paid sick leave. The new law that came into effect earlier this year, every 30 hours, you get 1 hour of paid sick leave. Minors get that as well. So the terms and conditions and privileges of employment apply to minors, whether it's work for a family member or for a private business.
So maybe the best way to do it, if you want to hire your kid, isn't necessarily to bring them into the office or have them do the business trade work, but set them up as a model so they could advertise your business for you. Take care of it that way.
That's a great way. Definitely a great way to do it. Yes, I would agree with that.
All right, Scott. Well, thank you very much. Stick with us in case you have questions. Anybody who's out there in the listening audience who's watching this live, it only applies if you're watching this live. Send us a question on the chat, and we'll shoot it over to Scott at the end of the show when we bring him together with Kevin, who's our next guest. So what Kevin's going to talk about is What happens after you get the job? What does that mean in terms of taxes, finance, maybe not just for you, but also for the person who hired you? We'll be right back in the State of Greater Western New York report after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York report. I'm your host, Chris Caroso, and with me right now is Kevin Woodworth. He's a tax accountant in Rochester, New York. Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, how you got into the job and what you like most about it?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Chris. So my name's Kevin Woodworth. I am a senior manager at DeJoy, Knopf & Blood in Rochester, New York. We're a mid-sized regional firm, and I would say in terms of what I do here at the firm is primarily individual work as well as some small business work. So I work with a lot of high net worth individuals as well as kind of professional service organizations. So deal a lot with the business as well as the individual owners, and also deal with a lot of clients that have stock options. And so there's a lot of planning around that. So in terms of kind of what I do day in and day out, I mean, there's obviously the compliance side of things that we just wrapped up back in May this year with them pushing out the deadline an extra month. But really where you can add a lot of value is around the planning aspect of things. So we spend a lot of time doing planning and working with clients to kind of make sure that they're in the most tax efficient position possible.
And right now, what we're focusing on are those clients who have kids, because those kids might be out there getting a job. So let's talk about they've got a job. They've successfully followed all the rules that Scott told them about, and they've got a job. What do they have to do? What is the first thing something as simple as withholding. So how do kids handle withholding, especially if they might not be earning enough to even pay income taxes on?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. So there's a few things that you need to think about, because anytime that you're starting a job, you're going to have what's called a Form W-4 on the federal side and Form IT-2104. That's the New York State form. So a lot of times, I mean, I get questions all the time from clients that say, well, my kid got a summer job. How do I fill out these forms? I have no idea what to do. I get that all the time. And there's a few things that you need to consider, because as you mentioned, Chris, one important thing is you need to know, I mean, generally approximately how much they might earn during the summer, because you need to pay attention to the different filing requirements in terms of a dependent and kind of how much income they have and if they need to file a tax return. So on the federal side, that threshold is actually relatively high now. It's, a little over $12,000. But from a New York State perspective, if you've got a dependent, any income that exceeds a little over $3,000, they would technically need to file a tax return. So let's just kind of go with the assumption that they're only going to make a few $1,000s or be under $3,000. In that situation, what you would want to do is say that you're exempt from withholding, because otherwise you're going to have a little bit of withholding that comes out, and then if you want to get that back, you'd have to file a tax return. So on the W-4, there's it's a newer form. They revised it a year or two ago, but you basically would just write exempt on the form towards the bottom and submit it that way, and then the employer will not take any federal tax out. There's a couple rules in terms of being able to file as exempt. You need to have no tax liability in the prior year and expect no liability in the current year. And the same thing applies on the New York State side of things. So there's what's called IT 2104-E, which stands for exemption. So the same rules. If you're not expecting to have a tax liability and you didn't have one in the prior year, you can be exempt. And the reason why it makes sense to do that, obviously, is the child will take home more net pay. But I get this question all the time during tax season is, hey, my child had a small summer job. I got their W-2. Can you file the tax return for me? And it maybe has $50 of withholding on it. And I say back to the client, it doesn't make any sense for me to prepare that. It's going to cost you more for me to prepare it than what you're going to get back. So a lot of times the parent might go ahead and file it themselves online, which you can definitely do, and there's free websites out there, but it would just be much easier if there wasn't any withholding, and if there's no requirement to file an income tax return, then there's really nothing you need to do. Because I've experienced also that when parents try to go file it themselves online, a lot of times what they forget is, since they're still a dependent, there's a box you need to check that says that you're a dependent of another. And if that box somehow gets forgotten and you don't check it, when we go to file the parent's tax return, then it gets rejected from e-filing because that social security number was already used, and it was not indicated that they were dependent on a different tax return. So those are the things you want to look out for when you're filing those forms, and hopefully you're in a position that you can just say that you're exempt, and that makes things a lot easier.
So now let's talk about tax strategies for the child. And this may have an impact on a decision to file a tax return anyway, so that you can take advantage of these taxes. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of times, I mean, if you've got a child that's working just a summer job, I mean, they're not eligible for any real benefits, so they can't contribute to a 401k or anything. So there's another strategy that I think is a pretty powerful strategy that, I mean, I'll kind of run through an example here too, that, I mean, your kid, when they're working as a 16, 17-year-old, whatever it is, they might not really appreciate it, but they'll definitely appreciate it when they get older and are kind of getting to retirement age. So what you can do is you can contribute to what's called a Roth IRA. So I'll take a couple minutes here and try to very high level explain what a Roth IRA is. So it's an individual retirement account that you can contribute to. And the requirement in order to contribute is you need to have earned income. So if you've got a child that's working a W-2 job over the summer, they're going to have wages. Wages are concerned earned income. So you can contribute up to $6,000 to a Roth IRA. So a lot of times when we talk with our clients is, I mean, the child doesn't necessarily, I mean, if they're making $3,000 over the summer, they likely aren't going to have $3,000 to put into the Roth IRA. But that's where the parents can come in and help things out. So if they gift some money to their child, the child can then in turn put the money into the Roth IRA. And you can only contribute to a Roth IRA up to the amount of earned income you have. So if the maximum is $6,000, but you only earned $3,000, you can only put $3,000 in. And the other thing in terms of the timing of it is you have the ability to contribute for 2021 all the way up until April 15th of 2022. So you've got plenty of time to contribute to that. But the the attraction of doing that for a child is a few different reasons. One is you've got a situation where Roth IRAs, the way that they work is you put money into it on a post-tax basis. So you don't get any upfront tax deduction or anything like that. But the power of it is the money inside the account grows tax-free, and then ultimately you can pull the money out tax-free when you get to an age where you're retired and you need to pull money out. So the idea with a child is that they're going to have a very low tax rate anyway because they're only making a few $1,000s. So putting it into the Roth makes a ton of sense. And Chris, I don't know if you want me to kind of run through an example to show you the power of it, or if you have other questions. But
we have a couple more. Yeah, we have a couple more questions, but there is one thing that I think is important to notice. This is a child IRA as opposed to an adult IRA. So with a child IRA, who's got to sign for it?
So with the child, I mean, the parent will ultimately be kind of responsible until they're kind of at kind of legal age there. But it's that's really the thing that you want to make sure of, and that's not a problem. I mean, I work with clients all the time, and they kind of, a lot of times the child probably doesn't even realize it's getting set up.
I was going to say, a parent can set this up, with the child not even knowing it, especially if the parent is contributing the money. I mean, as long as the child earns the money, it doesn't matter where the money that comes to be contributed into the IRA comes from.
Right.
Now, the one thing I'll say is I looked at this, and if you're 13 years old and you save $6,000 a year in a Roth IRA, you only earn $6,000 a year, so you're not paying any taxes there, any income taxes, and you do that through high school graduation, age 18, $6,000 a year through those, however, 5 or 6 years they are. When you retire at age 70 and you're a very bad investor, you get 3% less than what the average market return is, you end up with $2.5 million for being a bad investor just on that money. That does not include any money that you might save as an adult. So this is a very powerful way to accumulate money.
Yes, it's very powerful, and you've got, in your example, $2.5 million that is completely tax-free then. And I had a similar example that, I mean, even if you started at age 15 and you put, just say, $3,000 from age 15 to 20 and then bumped it up to $6,000, even when you're age 25, you're going to have, say, $70,000, $80,000 in that IRA already. So the earlier that you can start, the more powerful it's going to be.
Right. So there is one more question that I have. We have a couple more minutes left, and that is tax implications or benefits for the employer. Are there any sort of things that the employer should be aware of that they might be able to take advantage of in hiring a minor child?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and I mean, it's relatively limited on kind of who qualifies for this, but there is what's called a work opportunity tax credit. And when you hire what are called kind of qualified summer youth, that would be kind of someone that's age 16 or 17, you can get a credit, but they need to have not worked before. It's between, I think, May 1st and September 15th is the time frame of when they work. But the biggest thing that really kind of limits people or employers would be they needs to reside in an empowerment zone. And back in the day, there was more of them, but some of them are starting to go away. So, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, I know there's, as an example, like Syracuse is still considered to be in an empowerment zone. In Buffalo or Rochester, I think your options are more limited there, but that credit does get you up to a $1,200 per eligible employee credit. So it's something to at least consider and explore, because there's a potential that you could qualify. But that's one credit that a lot of people might not think about, but would definitely be something to consider, especially if you're going to be hiring summer work during the summer.
Right. Scott, we did have one question for you. You got about 15 seconds to answer it. And that is from the
I'll
point
go
of view, from the point of, I know you're a lawyer, and I'm an announcer, so there goes our 15 seconds. From the point of view of an employer, are there any other issues that they should be aware of when they're hiring minor children? I'll just let you answer like this because then we got a break.
The biggest thing I would say is when you're hiring a minor, the employer needs to not only look at the working papers, but the employer needs to hold the working papers. Because if you're employing minors and the Department of Labor shows up and you don't have them, you're talking a significant probable fine.
Great. Well, Scott, Kevin, thank you very much. Very, very informative show. And I'm sure that everyone will enjoy listening to what you said again as the show is re-aired. But I want to remind everybody, if you do want to participate in the show, just join us at stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com. And if I was smart, I would have that on the screen for you. But it's stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com. Go there, sign up to request to be a part of the live audience, and then you can ask questions just like that other person did. So I'm Chris Carosa, thanking you once again for watching the State of Greater Western New York Report. We'll see you next week.